We want to bring in now our panel for some political analysis. Edward Wong is a diplomatic and international correspondent for the New York Times. Susan Page is the Washington bureau chief of USA Today. Jamal Simmons is a host on Hill TV and a Democratic strategist. And Ben Domenech is the founder and publisher of The Federalist. A lot to get to with all of you. Susan, 2020 and the picture that we heard, Steve Bannon, the longtime White House strategist and ally for President Trump, really sketched out a number of interesting things, including the fact that he thinks there could be a primary challenger to the president from within the Republican Party.
Yes, he said there definitely will. He said it will be symbolic. But, you know, symbolic challenges to incumbent presidents can be really damaging. Ask George H.W. Bush, ask Jimmy Carter, the impact of having a primary challenge, even one that doesn't take the nomination away from you. I think this is a subject that should be probably of more concern to the White House than it is, because there's not really a question at this time that President Trump will retain the Republican nomination. But these primary fights can be brutal.
And Ben, you had Governor Hogan indicate that he thinks there should be a primary challenger.
Yeah, but I don't think that Bannon is correct about how this would play out. The fact is that unlike a situation with George H.W. Bush, polling consistently shows that the Republican Party is overwhelmingly in favor of the president, that they back him overwhelmingly. Sure, there could be a symbolic challenge in some way, but there's unlikely to be one that could get between the president and the base of the Republican Party, which is why Pat Buchanan's challenge, for instance, in '92 was so damaging to President Bush.
Yeah, here's what's so weird about it to me, right? Usually when somebody runs against an incumbent president, they run from the ideological fringe of that party, or the ideological wing of that party, right? Ted Kennedy ran from the liberal left. Pat Buchanan ran from kind of the Trump right, is really what it is, right? But this would be kind of a centrist challenge to a president. I don't know that we've ever seen someone run from the center against a president. What may occur is that that person's job may be to help organize who the anti-Trump forces are inside the Republican Party and identify that person for the Democrats, that those may be potential Democratic voters that could be won over.
And then there's the question for the Democrats of where's your center, right?
Yeah.
Because we haven't seen Joe Biden, who's expected to declare, jump in, or any of the other names. You had Governor Inslee here saying, oh, maybe this week I'll make a decision. And you have that extraordinary Time magazine cover this week reflecting what we're seeing, which is just about everyone is running. What do you make of the field? Where is the center?
Well, here's why Democrats should be thankful to Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders showed that there was a real passion on the Democratic left to find somebody who was going to not argue about how much we should cut taxes for the wealthy, but maybe we should be raising taxes on the wealthy, or maybe we should be trying to figure out how do we cover more people with Medicare or get more expanded daycare. So he's opened up that entire lane. Now, what could also be true is, you know, Facebook wasn't the first social media company. There was MySpace and there was Friendster before that. Bernie Sanders might be the MySpace and Friendster of the Democratic Party, right? Where he's helped show us that there's this path, and then what comes after that is a Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren or somebody like that who really takes advantage of the opening he created.
The effect of that has been that you've had all of these candidates, even including ones who could run to the center, tacking to the left in significant ways. I mean, the fact is that the majority of the Democratic cast endorsed the Green New Deal. The majority of the Democratic cast is completely backing abortion policies on the state level that are widely out of sync, not just with Americans, but with pro-choice Americans, polling indicates. That leaves an opening for the president to do the kinds of things that he did in the State of the Union, which is to frame the Democrats as the party of the extreme. He's going to continue to do that, and that's going to be, frankly, a way to keep those types of centrists that you talked about within the GOP, who might be open to a Democratic candidacy, away from them and loyal to the Republican Party.
There's an ideological debate in the Democratic Party, no question. There are centrists there, and there are people who endorse the Green New Deal. But one thing that unites the Democratic Party is that they want to win in 2020. And when you go out and talk to voters, there is no issue that they care about more than that one.
Ed, I want to ask you, one thing that we see lacking on many of the resumes of the candidates is foreign policy experience. You haven't heard a lot of views of what they think America's role in the world should be. Crisis in Venezuela is sort of forcing people to take a stand. Possibly this North Korea summit may force some of these candidates to describe foreign policy. What is it that you're seeing out there?
Well, I think that there are certain issues that candidates will be forced to address. Security is one of them, and so they'll criticize Trump, I think, for his take on North Korea and for the fact that we haven't made much progress on North Korea and its nuclear program since the first summit. And they'll question why we're holding these series of summits when Kim hasn't met the promises that he set out. Another big question is China and trade. And I think that we'll see talk about whether his approach to China and to the trade deficit and to other issues related to the economy is the right one.
And you have that March 2nd deadline looming
Right.
in terms of the president ramping up tariffs potentially, and that extraordinary exchange in the Oval Office where you saw a divide between the president and his chief negotiator over laying out the terms in front of the Chinese.
Right. My read on that was that Lighthizer, the chief negotiator, is nervous that the president will undermine the American negotiating position by pushing back on the idea of what an MOU means. I think
memorandum of understanding.
Right, and I think there is debate among experts about whether the president's right or whether Lighthizer was right in that. But having the president sort of go right against the trade negotiator in front of the television cameras is not good for the American negotiating position.
My first job
Put
in
diplomatically.
My first job in Washington was working for the U.S. Trade Representative Mickey Cantor, and I just cannot believe Bill Clinton would have ever upbraided Mickey Cantor in front of the Chinese negotiator and the entire public. Usually,
the Chinese negotiator laughed.
Yeah, usually you want your negotiator to have the strongest hand possible when they go into the deal. That's not what he's doing. One other point, you mentioned people who aren't talking about foreign policy. I think Kamala Harris yesterday came out for temporary protective status for Venezuelans in this particular crisis that's happening down there.
You know, I think that the exchange that you saw over memorandums of understanding in China was a little bit of a red flag to the diplomats who are concerned about the summit with North Korea, because there is concern that the president does not pay attention to what he sees as diplomatic niceties that diplomats see as absolutely crucial, and some concern that you heard articulated in your interview with Senator Markey that he will agree to a deal that looks good in the moment, helps him in the moment, but isn't really sustainable, doesn't have verification, offers the North Koreans too much for what they give us. This might be a sign of something to come.
The North Koreans are not going to give up their nuclear program. They just aren't.
You agree with U.S. intelligence then?
I mean, the thing to understand is just that, I mean, you can, when it comes to this summit, you can take the under. This is not going to be something that produces a massive breakthrough. It is going to be something that is going to be spun in the public, in a lot of different ways. But just in terms of what our expectations should be, they have to be tempered by the reality of what's going to be really on the table when it comes to the North Korean offer. And frankly, they're in the driver's seat.
And Ed, you had some reporting on this. We have the Secretary of State out there on a number of TV networks today, lowering expectations. You say now that he's doing it publicly, you have reporting on what he's saying privately. And what is that?
Right. He's saying privately that within, at least in his time in office, maybe the president's time in office, they might not get to full denuclearization. He tells this to Korea experts and to others that he talks to off the record. And I think that's, as Ben says, that might be the realistic outlook on where we can get to with North Korea. There might be very minimal work on the nuclear program. There might be some work, but not full denuclearization. And the big question that we have to ask is whether at what point would the United States publicly accept a nuclear North Korea and acknowledge that, just as it accepts Israel, Pakistan, and other countries having nuclear weapons?
Normalization of North Korea, no longer a pariah state.
Right. Well, Trump did say he fell in love. He and Kim fell in love, so maybe we'll have that going forward.
Yeah, and you had the odds at 60% of what the U.S.'s demands they'll likely get?
Right. That's what Pompeo has told some people.
That seems pretty high.
Right. I mean, North Korea has around 30 to 60 nuclear warheads already right now, and every 6 months it makes enough fissile material for another warhead. So experts think it's going forward with the program right now, even as diplomacy is continuing, and it will be hard to get it fully dismantled.
We should consider, of course, the withdrawal from the INF as being part of this conversation as well. I know that was mostly framed
The arms control agreement with
Yes,
Russians.
I know that was mostly framed in the context of our relationship with Russia, but the overwhelming agreement on the part of our European allies is that Russia has been in violation of this for years anyway, and much of the INF is actually restricting us when it comes to what we can do vis-a-vis the Asian situation, both with China and with North Korea. It could be something that could be interesting potentially down the road in terms of the types of responses that we could put in place that would have been banned under the INF.
And Susan, last word to you. A real meat grinder is how Steve Bannon described the next 4 to 5 months.
Yeah.
What should we be girding ourselves for?
We say this every week, but this is really going to be a crucial week. We're going to have North Korea summit and a split screen with Michael Cohen testifying before Congress, and we've got Bob Mueller standing in the doorway with his report to come out soon. It's going to be a remarkable few months. It's going to be a remarkable week or two ahead.
Let's not forget the underlying question that Mueller has, which is, did the president collude with the Russians?
We got to leave it there. And we will be back in a moment with a report on the Catholic Church's sex abuse summit.